I loved you with nothing to hide, every feeling written on my face. I never learned how to be careful, I just loved you in the open space. I said your name without hesitation, spoke my truth without a shield. I gave you every part of me, before I knew how love could feel. I didn't know love could be a risk, I thought honesty was safe. I loved you openly, with my whole heart showing through. I never played it safe or quiet, I didn't know how not to choose you. I gave you love without conditions, while you love with hesitation. I loved you openly, and paid the price for my devotion. I stayed when doubt filled the room, called your distance needing space. I kept believing in your words, even when your eyes changed. I learned to soften every truth, so I wouldn't scare you away. I loved you without defenses, you loved me halfway. I thought love meant staying honest, even when it hurt. I loved you openly, with my whole heart showing through. I never played it safe or quiet, I didn't know how not to choose you. I gave you love without conditions, while you love with hesitation. I loved you openly, and paid the price for my devotion. Do you know how brave it is to love without a shield, to show every fragile piece and hope it won't be used? I would've learned to guard my heart if I'd known you couldn't stay. But I loved you openly and trusted you that way. I loved you openly until I learned to breathe again. I won't regret the love I gave, even if it led to the end. Now I love with wisdom, but I won't love with shame. I loved you openly, and I'm proud of loving that way. You may forget how deeply I care, or how honestly I tried, but I'll always remember this. I loved you openly, and I survived. I learned your shadows better than your light, stayed when your silence filled the night. I held your secrets like they were mine, loved you in spaces you couldn't shine. I saw the cracks you tried to hide, the parts of you locked inside. I stayed when loving you felt hard. I loved you in the dark, I believed in you couldn't see yourself. I stayed when you pulled away. I loved you in the dark, when you couldn't love yourself. I gave you all my patience while I faded on the shelf. I stood beside your broken parts when you pushed me far apart. I loved you in the dark, even when you left me there. I learned to read your quiet pain, ignore my own just to ease the strain. I carried hope you never held, fought for a future you never failed. I softened every sharp goodbye, called your distance, needing time. I stayed through nights without a spark. I loved you in the dark. I kept choosing us alone while you were halfway gone. I loved you in the dark when you couldn't love yourself. I gave you all my patience while I faded on the shelf. I stood beside your broken parts when you pushed me far apart. I loved you in the dark, even when you left me there. Do you know what it costs to love someone unseen, to stay when you're invisible, to believe when it's just you and me? I would've loved you in the light if you let me in, but I learned the truth too late. Some hearts don't wanna be seen. I loved you in the dark with everything I had. I held your pain like it was mine while losing who I am. Now I'm learning how to breathe outside your fading spark. I loved you in the dark, but I won't stay there anymore. I'll keep my heart where light can reach, where love doesn't have to hide. I loved you in the dark, but I deserve the light. You moved on like it was nothing, like our memories didn't wait. You learned new names, new places, while I replayed yesterday. I kept your words like fragile glass, afraid they'd fade if I let go. You were already living life. I stayed in what we used to know. I thought holding on was loyalty, I didn't know it was fear. I stayed in the past while you found someone new. I lived in the almost of me and you. I replayed our laughter like it might make you stay. You were learning how to let go. I stayed in the past. I walked the streets we used to love, like you might still be there. I talked to ghosts of who we were, pretended you still cared. I told myself time would rewind, the love would find a way back. But time doesn't wait for broken hearts, it just keeps moving past. You heal by forgetting, I hurt by remembering. I stayed in the past, holding on to your name. I kept our story breathing long after yours had changed. You were learning how to move on. I stayed in the past. Do you know how lonely it is to miss someone who's already gone? To love a memory when the person has moved on. I would have healed sooner if I let the truth be said, but I chose comfort in the past instead of the life ahead. I stayed in the past until it started hurting me. I confused nostalgia with hope and pain with loyalty. Now I'm learning how to step forward, even though it aches. You didn't leave me behind. I stayed in the past. I keep the love, but I release the pain. I stayed in the past. Now I'm walking away. I stayed in rooms you no longer felt, surrounded by who you used to be. I talked to echoes of your laughter, like they were still here with me. The house was full of yesterday, but empty every night. I kept reliving what we were, just to make it feel right. I told myself this was still love, even when love was gone. I stayed for memories, not for what we were now. I held on to photographs and promises we forgot. How you had already moved on. I stayed where we used to be. I didn't stay for love anymore. I stay for memories. I replayed moments like they changed, like time would feel some shame. I wore your name like a scar, hoping you'd still feel the same. I confused comfort with connection, and habit with belief. I stay loyal to a past that refused to stay with me. I can love it what we were, because losing it for worse. I stayed for memories, not for what we were now. I held on to photographs and promises we forgot. How you had already moved on. I stayed where we used to be. I didn't stay for love anymore. I stayed for memory. Do you know how heavy it is to love a version that no longer exists? To stay because leaving means admitting you've already lost this. I would have healed sooner if I let the past rest, but I stayed for memories, and they cost me myself. I stayed for memories until they started hurting me. I kept trying to relive a love that refused to set me free. Now I'm learning how to let go of who we used to be. I didn't lose you when you left, lost myself when I stayed. I'll keep the good without the pain. for memories. Now I'm choosing the day. I loved you with my guard still shaking, with one foot ready to run. Every smile felt like a warning, every silence felt like one. I memorized the sound of steps, so I know when you were near. I loved you without certainty, I loved you with fear. I wanted to trust what we were building, but my heart kept holding its breath. I loved you with fear, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too deeply, and I knew how easily love disappears. I gave you my heart carefully, like it could break in your hands. I loved you with fear, and you still let me fall. I questioned every change in tone, every space between your words. I caught my doubt being realistic, but it was just me being hurt. I tried to stay quiet, stay easy, so you wouldn't walk away. I learned to love you softly, in case you couldn't stay. I was preparing for goodbye before you ever said it. I loved you with fear, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too deeply, and I knew how easily love disappears. I gave you my heart carefully, like it could break in your hands. I loved you with fear, and you still let me fall. Do you know how exhausting it is to love and brace for pain, to hold someone close while expecting the rain? I would've loved you without fear if you made me feel safe, but love can't grow freely when you're waiting for it to break. I loved you with fear, and I stayed anyway. I hoped you proved my doubts wrong, but you slowly walked away. Now I'm learning how to love again without holding my breath. I loved you with fear, and now I'm done living